Chapter 66. Matrimonial Projects. The day following this scene, at the hour the banker usually chose to pay a visit to Madame Danglars on his way to his office, his coupé did not appear. At this time, that is, about 12:30, Madame Danglars ordered her carriage and went out. Danglars, hidden behind a curtain, watched the departure he had been waiting for. He gave orders that he should be informed as soon as Madame Danglars appeared. But at 2 o'clock she had not returned. He then called for his horses, drove to the chamber, and inscribed his name to speak against the budget. From 12 to 2 o'clock, Danglars had remained in his study, unsealing his dispatches, and becoming more and more sad every minute, heaping figure upon figure, and receiving, among other visits, one from Mayor Cavalcanti, who, as stiff and exact as ever, presented himself precisely at the hour named the night before to terminate his business with the banker. On leaving the chamber, Danglars, who had shown violent marks of agitation during the sitting, and been more bitter than ever against the ministry, re-entered his carriage, and told the coachman to drive to the Avenue des Champs-Élysées, number 30. Monte Cristo was at home, only he was engaged with someone, and begged Danglars to wait for a moment in the drawing-room. While the banker was waiting in the ante-room, the door opened, and a man dressed as an abbé, and doubtless more familiar with the house than he was, came in, and instead of waiting, merely bowed, passed on to the further apartments, and disappeared. A minute after, the door by which the priest had entered reopened, and Monte Cristo appeared. "Pardon me," he said, "my dear Baron, but one of my friends, the Abbé Busoni, whom you perhaps saw pass by, has just arrived in Paris. Not having seen him for a long time, I could not make up my mind to leave him sooner, so I hope this will be sufficient reason for my having made you wait." "Nay," said Danglars, "it is my fault. I have chosen my visit at a wrong time, and I will retire." "Not at all. On the contrary, be seated. But what is the matter with you? You look careworn. Really, you alarm me. Melancholy is a capitalist, like the appearance of a comet, presages some misfortune to the world." "I have been in ill luck for several days," said Danglars, "and I have heard nothing but bad news." "Ah, indeed?" said Monte Cristo. "Have you had another fall at the Bourse?" "No, I am safe for a few days at least. I'm only annoyed about a bankrupt of Trieste." "Really? Does it happen to be Jacopo Manfredi?" "Exactly so. Imagine a man who has transacted business with me for I don't know how long, to the amount of 800,000 or 900,000 francs during the year, never a mistake or delay. A fellow who paid like a prince. Well, I was a million in advance with him, and now my fine Jacopo Manfredi suspends payment." "Really?" "It is an unheard-of fatality. I draw upon him for 600,000 francs. My bills are returned and paid. I hold bills of exchange signed by him to the value of 400,000 francs, payable at his correspondent's in Paris at the end of this month. Today is the 30th. I present them, but my correspondent has disappeared. This, with my Spanish affairs, made a pretty end to the month." "Then you really lost by that affair in Spain?" "Yes, only 700,000 francs out of my cash box, nothing more." "Why, how could you make such a mistake, such an old stagger?" "Oh, it's all my wife's fault. She dreamed Don Carlos had returned to Spain. She believes in dreams. It is magnetism, she says, and when she dreams a thing, it is true to happen, she assures me. On this conviction, I allow her to speculate. She having her bank and her stockbrokers, she speculated and lost. It is true she speculates with her own money, not mine. Nevertheless, you can understand that when 700,000 francs leave the wife's pocket, the husband always finds it out. But do you mean to say you have not heard of this?" "Why, the thing has made a tremendous noise." "Yes, I heard it spoken of, but I did not know the details. And then, no one can be more ignorant than I am of the affairs in the Bourse." "Then you do not speculate?" "I? How could I speculate when I already have so much trouble in regulating my income? I should be obliged, besides my steward, to keep a clerk and a boy. But touching these Spanish affairs, I think that the Baroness did not dream the whole of the Don Carlos matter. The papers said something about it, did they not?" "Then you believe the papers?" "Aye, not the least in the world. Only I fancied that the honest messenger was an exception to the rule, and that it only announced telegraphic dispatches." "Well, that's what puzzles me," replied Danglars. "The news of the return of Don Carlo was brought by telegraph." "So that," said Monte Cristo, "you have lost nearly 1,700,000 francs this month." "Not nearly, indeed. That is exactly my loss." "Diable," said Monte Cristo compassionately, "it is a hard blow for a third-rate fortune." "Third-rate?" said Danglars, rather humble. "What do you mean by that?" "Certainly," continued Monte Cristo, "I make 3 assortments of fortune: first-rate, second-rate, and third-rate fortunes. I call those first-rate which are composed of treasures one possesses under one's hand, such as mines, lands, and funded property, in such states as France, Austria, and England, provided these treasures and property form a total of about 100 millions. I call those second-rate fortunes that are gained by manufacturing enterprises, joint stock companies, viceroyalties, and principalities, not drawing more than 1,500,000 francs, the whole forming a capital of about 50 millions. Finally, I call those third-rate fortunes which are composed of a fluctuating capital, dependent upon the will of others, or upon changes which a bankruptcy involves or a false telegram shakes, such as banks, speculations of the day. In fact, all operations under the influence of greater or less mischances, the whole bringing in a real or fictitious capital of about 15 millions. I think this is about your position, is it not?" "Confound it, yes," replied Danglars. "The result, then, of 6 more such months as this would be to reduce the third-rate house to despair." "Oh," said Danglars, becoming very pale, "how you are running on! Let us imagine 7 such months," continued Monte Cristo in the same tone. "Tell me, have you ever thought that 7 times 1,700,000 francs make nearly 12 millions? No, you have not. Well, you are right, for if you indulged in such reflections, you would never risk your principle, which is to the speculator what the skin is to civilized men. We have our clothes, some more splendid than others. This is our credit. But when a man dies, he has only his skin. In the same way, on retiring from business, you have nothing but your real principal, of about 5 or 6 millions at the most, for third-rate fortunes are never more than a fourth of what they appear to be, like the locomotive of a railway, the size of which is magnified by the smoke and steam surrounding it. Well, out of the 5 or 6 millions which form your real capital, you have just lost nearly 2 millions, which must, of course, in the same degree diminish your credit and fictitious fortune. To follow out my simile, your skin has been opened by bleeding, and this, if repeated 3 or 4 times, will cause death. So pay attention to it, my dear Monsieur Danglars. Do you want money? Do you wish me to lend you some?" "What a bad calculator you are!" exclaimed Danglars, calling to his assistance all his philosophy and dissimulation. "I have made money at the same time by speculations which have succeeded. I have made up the loss of blood by nutrition. I lost a battle in Spain. I have been defeated in Trieste. But my naval army in India will have taken some galleons, and my Mexican pioneers will have discovered some mine." Very good, very good. But the wound remains, and will reopen at the first loss." "No, for I am only embarked in certainties. replied Danglars, with the air of a mountebank sounding his own praises. "To involve me, 3 governments must crumble to dust." "Well, such things have been. That there should be a famine. Recollect the 7 fat and the 7 lean kine. Or that the sea should become dry, as the day of Pharaoh, and even then my vessels would become caravans." "So much the better. I congratulate you, my dear Monsieur Danglars," said Monte Cristo. "I see I was deceived, and that you belong to the class of second-rate fortunes." "I think I may aspire to that honor," said Danglars with a smile, which reminded Monte Cristo of the sickly moons which bad artists are so fond of daubing into their pictures of ruins. "But while we are speaking of business," Danglars added, pleased to find an opportunity of changing the subject, "tell me, what am I to do for Monsieur Cavalcanti?" "Give him money if he is recommended to you, and the recommendation seems good." "Excellent. He presented himself this morning with a bond of 40,000 francs, payable at sight on you, signed by Busoni, and returned by you to me, with your endorsement. Of course, I immediately counted him over the 40 banknotes." Monte Cristo nodded his head in token of assent. "But that is not all," continued Danglars. "He has opened an account with my house for his son." "May I ask how much he allows the young man?" 5,000 francs per month. 60,000 francs per year. I thought I was right in believing that Cavalcanti to be a stingy fellow. How can a young man live upon 5,000 francs a month? But you understand that if the young man should want a few thousands more, do not advance it. The father will never repay it. You do not know these ultramontane millionaires. They are regular misers. And by whom were they recommended to you? Oh, by the house of Fenzi, one of the best in Florence. I do not mean to say you will lose, but nevertheless, mind you hold to the terms of the agreement. Would you not trust the Cavalcanti? I would advance 6 millions on his signature. I was only speaking in reference to the second-rate fortunes we were mentioning just now. And with all this, how unassuming he is! I should never have taken him for anything more than a mere mayor. And you would have flattered him, for certainly, as you say, he has no manner. The first time I saw him, he appeared to me like an old lieutenant who had grown mouldy under his epaulettes. But all the Italians are the same. They are like all Jews when they are not glittering in oriental splendor. "The young man is better," said Danglars. "Yes, a little nervous, perhaps, but upon the whole he appeared tolerable. I was uneasy about him." "Why?" "Because you met him at my house, just after his introduction into the world, as they told me. He has been travelling with a very severe tutor, and had never been to Paris before." "Ah, I believe noblemen marry amongst themselves." "Do they not?" asked Danglars carelessly. "They like to unite their fortunes." "It is usual, certainly. But Cavalcanti is an original who does nothing like other people. I cannot help thinking that he had brought his son to France to choose a wife." "Do you think so?" "I'm sure of it." "And you have heard his fortune mentioned?" "Nothing else was talked of. Only some said he was worth millions, and others that he did not possess a farthing." "And what is your opinion?" "I ought not to influence you, because it is only my own personal impression." "Well, and it is that?" "My opinion is, that all these old podestas, these ancient condottieri, for the Cavalcanti have commanded armies and governed provinces, my opinion, I say, is that they have buried their millions in corners, the secret of which they have transmitted only to their eldest sons, who have done the same from generation to generation, and the proof of this is seen in their yellow and dry appearance, like the florins of the Republic, which from being constantly gazed upon have become reflected in them." Certainly, said Danglars, and this is further supported by the fact of their not possessing an inch of land. Very little at least. I know of none which Cavalcanti possesses, except in his palace in Lucca. Ah, he has a palace, said Danglars, laughing. Come, that is something. Yes, and more than that, he lets it to the Minister of Finance, while he lives in a simple house. Oh, as I told you before, I think the old fellow is very close. Come, you do not flatter him. I scarcely know him. I think I have seen him 3 times in my life. All I know relating to him is through Busoni and himself. He was telling me this morning that, tired of letting his property lie dormant in Italy, which is a dead nation, he wished to find the method, either in France or England, of multiplying his millions. But remember that though I place great confidence in Busoni, I am not responsible for this. Never mind. Accept my thanks for the client you have sent me. It is a fine name to inscribe on my ledgers, and my cashier was quite proud of it when I explained to him who the Cavalcanti were. By the way, this is merely a simple question. When this sort of people marry their sons, do they give them any fortune? Ah, that depends upon circumstances. I know an Italian prince, rich as a gold mine, one of the noblest families in Tuscany, who, when his sons married according to his wish, gave them millions, and when they married against his consent, merely allowed them 30 crowns a month. Should André marry according to his father's views, he will perhaps give him 1, 2, or 3 millions. For example, supposing it were the daughter of a banker, he might take an interest in the house of the father-in-law of his son. Then again, if he dislikes his choice, the mayor takes the key, double-locks his coffer, and Master Andrea would be obliged to live like the sons of a Parisian family, by shuffling cards or rattling the dice. Oh, that boy will find out some Bavarian or Peruvian princess. He will want a crown and an immense fortune. No, these grand lords of the other side of the Alps frequently marry into plain families. Like Jupiter, they like to cross the race. But do you wish to marry Andrea, my dear Monsieur Danglars, that you are asking so many questions? Ma foi, said Danglars, it would not be a bad speculation, I fancy, and you know I'm a speculator. You are not thinking of Mademoiselle Danglars, I hope. You would not like poor Andrea to have his throat cut by Albert. Albert? Repeated Danglars, shrugging his shoulders. Ah, well, he would care very little about it, I think. But he is betrothed to your daughter, I believe? Well, Monsieur de Morcerf and I have talked about this marriage, but Madame de Morcerf and Albert... You do not mean to say that it would not be a good match? Indeed, I imagine that Mademoiselle Danglars is as good as Monsieur de Morcerf. Mademoiselle Danglars' fortune would be great, no doubt, especially if the telegraph should not make any more mistakes. Oh, I do not mean her fortune only, but tell me. What? Why did you not invite Monsieur and Madame de Morcerf to your dinner? I did so, but he excused himself on account of Madame de Morcerf being obliged to go to Dieppe for the benefit of sea air. Yes, yes, said Danglars, laughing. It would do her a great deal of good. Why so? Because it is the air she always breathed in her youth. Monte Cristo took no notice of this ill-natured remark. But still, if Albert is not so rich as Mademoiselle Danglars, said the Count, you must allow that he has a fine name. So he has, but I like mine as well. Certainly, your name is popular, and does honour to the title they have adorned it with, but you are too intelligent not to know that according to a prejudice too firmly rooted to be exterminated, a nobility which dates back 5 centuries is worth more than one that can only reckon 20 years. And for this very reason, said Danglars with a smile, which he tried to make sardonic, I prefer Monsieur Andrea Cavalcanti to Monsieur Albert de Morcerf. Still, I should not think de Morcerf would yield to the Cavalcanti. De Morcerf? Stay, my dear Count, said Danglars. You are a man of the world, are you not? I think so. And you understand heraldry? A little. Well, look at my coat of arms. It is worth more than Morcerf's. Why so? Because, though I'm not a baron by birth, my real name is, at least, Danglars. Well, what then? While his name is not Morcerf. How, not Morcerf? Not the least in the world. Go on. I have been made a baron, so that I actually am one. He made himself a count, so that he is not one at all. Impossible. Listen, my dear Count, Monsieur de Morcerf has been my friend, or rather my acquaintance, during the last 30 years. You know I have made the most of my arms, though I never forgot my origin. A proof of great humility, or great pride, said Monte Cristo. Well, when I was a clerk, Morcerf was a mere fisherman. And then he was called Fernand. Only Fernand? Fernand Mondego. You are sure? Pardieu, I have bought enough fish of him to know his name. Then why did you think of giving your daughter to him? Because Fernand and Danglars, being both parvenus, both having become noble, both rich, are about equal in worth, excepting that there have been certain things mentioned of him that were never said of me. What? Oh, nothing. Ah, yes. What you tell me recalls to mind something about the name of Fernand Mondego. I have heard that name in Greece. In conjecture with the affairs of Ali Pasha? Exactly so. This is the mystery, said Danglars. I acknowledge I would have given anything to find it out. It would be very easy if you much wished it. How so? Probably you have some correspondent in Greece. I should think so. At Yanina? Everywhere. Well, write to your correspondent in Yanina, and ask him what part was played by a Frenchman named Fernand Mondego in the catastrophe of Ali Tepelini. You are right, exclaimed Danglars, rising quickly. I will write today. Do so. I will. And if you should hear of anything very scandalous, I will communicate it to you. You will oblige me. Danglars rushed out of the room and made but one leap into his coupé. End of chapter 66.
Chapter 67. At the office of the King's Attorney. Let us leave the banker driving his horses at their fullest speed, and follow Madame Danglars in her morning excursion. We have said that at 12:30 o'clock Madame Danglars had ordered her horses, and had left home in the carriage. She directed her course toward the Faubourg Saint-Germain, went down the Rue Mazarine, and stopped at the Passage du Pont Neuf. She descended, and went through the passage. She was very plainly dressed, as would be the case with a woman of taste walking in the morning. At the Rue Guénégaud she called a cab, and directed the driver to go to the Rue de Harlay. As soon as she was seated in the vehicle, she drew from her pocket a very thick black veil, which she tied on to her straw bonnet. She then replaced the bonnet, and saw with pleasure, in a little pocket mirror, that her white complexion and brilliant eyes were alone visible. The cab crossed the Pont Neuf and entered the Rue de Harlay by the Place Dauphine. The driver was paid as the door opened, and stepping lightly up the stairs, Madame Danglars soon reached the Salle des Pas Perdus. There was a great deal going on that morning, and many business-like persons at the Palais. Business-like persons pay very little attention to women, and Madame Danglars crossed the hall without exciting any more attention than any other woman calling upon her lawyer. There was a great press of people in Monsieur de Villefort's antechamber, but Madame Danglars had no occasion even to pronounce her name. The instant she appeared, the doorkeeper rose, came to her, and asked her whether she was not the person with whom the procureur had made an appointment, and on her affirmative answer being given, he conducted her by a private passage to Monsieur de Villefort's office. The magistrate was seated in an armchair, writing, with his back towards the door. He did not move as he heard it open, and the doorkeeper pronounced the words, "Walk in, madame," and then reclose it. But no sooner had the man's footsteps ceased than he started up, drew the bolts, closed the curtains, and examined every corner of the room. Then, when he had assured himself that he could neither be seen nor heard, and was consequently relieved of doubts, he said, "Thanks, madame, thanks for your punctuality." And he offered a chair to Madame Danglars, which she accepted, for her heart beat so violently that she felt nearly suffocated. "It is a long time, madame," said the procureur, describing a half-circle with his chair so as to place himself exactly opposite to Madame Danglars. "It is a long time since I had the pleasure of speaking alone with you, and I regret that we have only now met to enter upon a painful conversation." "Nevertheless, sir, you see I have answered your first appeal, although certainly the conversation must be much more painful for me than for you." Villefort smiled bitterly. "It is true, then," he said, rather uttering his thoughts aloud than addressing his companion. "It is true, then, that all our actions leave their traces, some sad, some bright, on our paths. It is true that every step in our lives is like the course of an insect on the sands. It leaves its track. Alas, to many the path is traced by tears." "Sir," said Madame Danglars, "you can feel for my emotion, can you not? Spare me then, I beseech you. When I look at this room, whence so many guilty creatures have departed, trembling and ashamed, when I look at that chair before which I now sit trembling and ashamed, oh, it requires all my reason to convince me that I am not a very guilty woman and you a menacing judge." Villefort dropped his head and sighed. "And I," he said, "I feel that my place is not in the judge's seat, but on the prisoner's stool." "You?" said Madame Danglars. "Yes, I." "I think, sir, you exaggerate your situation," said Madame Danglars, whose beautiful eyes sparkled for a moment. "The paths of which you were just speaking have been traced by all young men of ardent imaginations. Besides the pleasure, there is always remorse from the indulgence of our passions, and after all, what have you men to fear from all this? The world excuses and notoriety ennobles you." "Madame," replied Villefort, "you know that I am no hypocrite, or at least that I never deceive without a reason. If my brow be severe, it is because many misfortunes have clouded it. If my heart be petrified, it is that it might sustain the blows it has received. I was not so in my youth. I was not so on the night of the betrothal, when we were all seated around a table in the Rue du Coeur at Marseilles. But since then, everything has changed in and about me. I am accustomed to brave difficulties, and in the conflict to crush those who, by their own free will, or by chance, voluntarily or involuntarily, interfere with me in my career. It is generally the case that what we most ardently desire is as ardently withheld from us by those who wish to obtain it, or from whom we attempt to snatch it. Thus, the greater number of a man's errors come before him disguised under the specious form of necessity. Then, after error has been committed in a moment of excitement, of delirium, or of fear, we see that we might have avoided and escaped it. The means we might have used, which we in our blindness could not see, then seem simple and easy, and we say, 'Why did I not do this instead of that?' Women, on the contrary, are rarely tormented with remorse, for the decision does not come from you. Your misfortunes are generally imposed upon you, and your faults the results of others' crimes." "In any case, sir, you will allow," replied Madame Danglars, "that even if the fault were mine alone, I last night received a severe punishment for it." "Poor thing," said Villefort, pressing her hand. "It was too severe for your strength, for you were twice overwhelmed, and yet—" "Well?" "Well, I must tell you. Collect all your courage, for you have not yet heard all." "Ah!" exclaimed Madame Danglars, alarmed. "What is there more to hear?" "You only look back to the past, and it is, indeed, bad enough. Well, picture to yourself a future more gloomy still, certainly frightful, perhaps sanguinary." The Baroness knew how calm Villefort naturally was, and his present excitement frightened her so much that she opened her mouth to scream, but the sound died in her throat. How has this terrible past been recalled? Cried Villefort. How is it that it has escaped from the depths of the tomb and the recesses of our hearts where it was buried, to visit us now like a phantom, whitening our cheeks and flushing our brows with shame? Alas, said Hermine, doubtless it is chance. Chance, replied Villefort. No, no, madame, there is no such thing as chance. Oh, yes. Has not a fatal chance revealed all this? Was it not by chance the Count of Monte Cristo bought that house? Was it not by chance he caused the earth to be dug up? Is it not by chance that the unfortunate child was disinterred under the trees, that poor innocent offspring of mine which I never even kissed, but for whom I wept many, many tears? Ah, my heart clung to the Count when he mentioned the dear spoil found beneath the flowers. Well, no, madame. This is the terrible news I have to tell you, said Villefort in a hollow voice. No, nothing was found beneath the flowers. There was no child disinterred. No. You must not weep. No, you must not groan. You must tremble. What can you mean? Asked Madame Danglars, shuddering. I mean that Monsieur de Monte Cristo, digging underneath these trees, found neither skeleton nor chest, because neither of them was there. Neither of them there? Repeated Madame Danglars, her staring wide-open eyes expressing her alarm. Neither of them there, she said again, as though striving to impress herself with the meaning of the words which escaped her. No, said Villefort, burying his face in his hands. No, 100 times no. Then you did not bury the poor child there, sir? Why did you deceive me? Where did you place it? Tell me, where? There. But listen to me, listen, and you will pity me who has for 20 years alone borne the heavy burden of grief I am about to reveal, without casting the least portion upon you. Oh, you frighten me, but speak, I will listen. You recollect that sad night, when you were half expiring on that bed in the red damask room, while I, scarcely less agitated than you, awaited your delivery. The child was born, was given to me, motionless, breathless, voiceless. We thought it dead. Madame Danglars moved rapidly, as though she would spring from her chair, but Villefort stopped and clasped his hands as if to implore her attention. We thought it dead, he repeated. I placed it in the chest, which was to take the place of a coffin. I descended to the garden, I dug a hole, and then flung it down in haste. Scarcely had I covered it with earth, when the arm of the Corsican was stretched towards me. I saw a shadow rise, and at the same time a flash of light. I felt pain. I wished to cry out, but an icy shiver ran through my veins and stifled my voice. I fell lifeless, and fancied myself killed. Never shall I forget your sublime courage when, having returned to consciousness, I dragged myself to the foot of the stairs, and you, almost dying yourself, came to meet me. We were obliged to keep silent upon the dreadful catastrophe. You had the fortitude to regain the house, assisted by your nurse. A duel was the pretext for my wound. Though we scarcely expected it, our secret remained in our own keeping alone. I was taken to Versailles. For 3 months I struggled with death. At last, as I seemed to cling to life, I was ordered to the south. 4 men carried me from Paris to Chalons, walking 6 leagues a day. Madame de Villefort followed the litter in her carriage. At Chalons I was put upon the Saône. Thence I passed on to the Rhône, whence I descended, merely with the current, to Arles. At Arles I was again placed on my litter, and continued my journey to Marseilles. My recovery lasted 6 months. I never heard you mentioned, and I did not dare inquire for you. When I returned to Paris, I learned that you, the widow of Monsieur de Nargonne, had married Monsieur Danglars. What was the subject of my thoughts from the time consciousness returned to me? Always the same. Always the child's corpse, coming every night in my dreams, rising from the earth, and hovering over the grave with menacing look and gesture. I inquired immediately on my return to Paris. The house had not been inhabited since we left it, but it had just been let for 9 years. I found the tenant. I pretended that I disliked the idea that a house belonging to my wife's father and mother should pass into the hands of strangers. I offered to pay them for cancelling the lease. They demanded 6,000 francs. I would have given 10,000. I would have given 20,000. I had the money with me. I made the tenant sign the deed of resolution, and when I had obtained what I so much wanted, I galloped to Auteuil. No one had entered the house since I had left it. It was 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I ascended into the Red Room and waited for night. There all the thoughts which had disturbed me during my year of constant agony came back with double force. The Corsican, who had declared the vendetta against me, who had followed me from Nîmes to Paris, who had hid himself in the garden, who had struck me, had seen me dig the grave, had seen me inter the child. He might become acquainted with your person, nay, he might even then have known it. Would he not one day make you pay for keeping this terrible secret? Would it not be a sweet revenge for him when he found that I had not died from the blow of his dagger? It was therefore necessary, before everything else, and at all risks, that I should cause all traces of the past to disappear, that I should destroy every material vestige. Too much reality would always remain in my recollection. It was for this I had annulled the lease. It was for this I had come. It was for this I was waiting. Night arrived. I allowed it to become quite dark. I was without a light in that room. When the wind shook all the doors, behind which I continually expected to see some spy concealed, I trembled. I seemed everywhere to hear your moans behind me in the bed, and I dared not turn around. My heart beat so violently that I feared my wound would open. At length, one by one, all the noises in the neighborhood ceased. I understood that I had nothing to fear, that I should neither be seen nor heard, so I decided upon descending to the garden. Listen, Hermine. I consider myself as brave as most men, but when I drew from my breast the little key of the staircase, which I had found in my coat, that little key we both used to cherish so much, which you wished to have fastened to a golden ring, when I opened the door and saw the pale moon shedding a long stream of white light on the spiral staircase like a spectre, I leaned against the wall and nearly shrieked. I seemed to be going mad. At last I mastered my agitation. I descended the staircase step by step. The only thing I could not conquer was a strange trembling in my knees. I grasped the railings. If I had relaxed my hold for a moment, I should have fallen. I reached the lower door. Outside this door a spade was placed against the wall. I took it, and advanced towards the thicket. I had provided myself with a dark lantern. In the middle of the lawn I stopped to light it. Then I continued my path. It was the end of November. All the verdure of the garden had disappeared. The trees were nothing more than skeletons with their long bony arms, and the dead leaves sounded on the gravel under my feet. My terror overcame me to such a degree as I approached the thicket that I took a pistol from my pocket and armed myself. I fancied continually that I saw the figure of the Corsican between the branches. I examined the thicket with my dark lantern. It was empty. I looked carefully around. I was indeed alone. No noise disturbed the silence but an owl, whose piercing cry seemed to be calling up the phantoms of the night. I tied my lantern to a forked branch I had noticed a year before, at the precise spot where I had stopped to dig the hole. The grass had grown very thickly there during the summer, and when autumn arrived no one had been there to mow it. Still, one place where the grass was thin attracted my attention. It evidently was there I had turned up the ground. I went to work. The hour, then, for which I had been waiting during the last year, had at length arrived. How I worked, how I hoped, how I struck every piece of turf, thinking to find some resistance to my spade. But no, I found nothing, though I had made a hole twice as large as the first. I thought I had been deceived, had mistaken the spot. I turned around, I looked at the trees, I tried to recall the details which had struck me at the time. A cold, sharp wind whistled through the leafless branches, and yet the drops fell from my forehead. I recollected that I was stabbed just as I was trampling the ground to fill up the hole. While doing so, I had leaned against a laburnum. Behind me was an artificial rockery intended to serve as a resting place for persons walking in the garden. In falling, my hand, relaxing its hold of the laburnum, felt the coldness of the stone. On my right I saw the tree, behind me the rock. I stood in the same attitude and threw myself down. I rose, and again began digging and enlarging the hole. Still I found nothing. The chest was no longer there. "The chest no longer there," murmured Madame Danglars, choking with fear. "Think not I contented myself with this one effort," continued Villefort. "No, I searched the whole thicket. I thought the assassin, having discovered the chest and supposing it to be a treasure, had intended carrying it off, but perceiving his error, had dug another hole and deposited it there, but I could find nothing. Then the idea struck me that he had not taken these precautions, and had simply thrown it in a corner. In the last case I must wait for daylight to renew my search. I remained in the room and waited. Oh, heavens! When daylight dawned, I went down again. My first visit was to the thicket. I hoped to find some traces which had escaped me in the darkness. I had turned up the earth over a surface of more than 20 feet square, and a depth of 2 feet. A laborer would not have done in a day what occupied me an hour, but I could find nothing, absolutely nothing. Then I renewed the search. Supposing it had been thrown aside, it would probably be on the path which led to the little gate. But this examination was as useless as the first, and with a bursting heart I returned to the thicket, which now contained no hope for me. "Oh," cried Madame Danglars, "it was enough to drive you mad." "I hoped for a moment that it might," said Villefort, "but that happiness was denied me. However, recovering my strength and my ideas, 'Why,' said I, 'should that man have carried away the corpse?' "But you said," replied Madame Danglars, "he would require it as a proof." "Ah, no, madame, that could not be. Dead bodies are not kept a year. They are shown to a magistrate, and the evidence is taken. Now nothing of the kind has happened." "What then?" asked Hermine, trembling violently. "Something more terrible, more fatal, more alarming for us. The child was, perhaps, alive, and the assassin may have saved it." Madame Danglars uttered a piercing cry, and, seizing Villefort's hands, exclaimed, "My child was alive?" said she. "You buried my child alive? You were not certain my child was dead, and you buried it? Ah!" Madame Danglars had risen, and stood before the procureur, whose hands she wrung in her feeble grasp. "I know not. I merely suppose so, as I might suppose anything else," replied Villefort with a look so fixed it indicated that his powerful mind was on the verge of despair and madness. "Ah, my child, my poor child!" cried the Baroness, falling on her chair and stifling her sobs in her handkerchief. Villefort, becoming somewhat reassured, perceived that to avert the maternal storm gathering over his head, he must inspire Madame Danglars with the terror he felt. "You understand, then, that if it were so," said he, rising in his turn and approaching the Baroness to speak to her in a lower tone, "we are lost. This child lives, and someone knows it lives. Someone is in possession of our secret, and since Monte Cristo speaks before us of a child disinterred, when that child could not be found, it is he who is in possession of our secret." "Just God! Avenging God!" murmured Madame Danglars. Villefort's only answer was a stifled groan. "But the child? The child, sir?" repeated the agitated mother. "How I have searched for him," replied Villefort, wringing his hands. "How I have called him in my long sleepless nights. How I have longed for royal wealth to purchase 1,000,000 of secrets from 1,000,000 of men, and to find mine among them. At last, one day, when for the 100th time I took up my spade, I asked myself again and again what the Corsican could have done with the child. A child encumbers a fugitive. Perhaps, on perceiving it was still alive, he had thrown it into the river." "Impossible!" cried Madame Danglars. "A man may murder another out of revenge, but he would not deliberately drown a child." "Perhaps," continued Villefort, "he had put it in the foundling hospital." "Oh, yes, yes!" cried the Baroness. "My child is there." I ran to the hospital and learned that the same night, the night of the 20th of September, a child had been brought there, wrapped in part of a fine linen napkin, purposely torn in half. This portion of the napkin was marked with half a baron's crown and the letter H. "Truly, truly," said Madame Danglars, "all my linen is marked thus. Monsieur de Nargonne was a baronet, and my name is Hermine. Thank God, my child was not then dead." "No, it was not dead." "And can you tell me so without fearing to make me die of joy? Where is the child?" Villefort shrugged his shoulders. "Do I know?" said he. "And do you believe that if I knew, I would relate to you all its trials and all its adventures, as would a dramatist or a novel writer? Alas, no, I know not. A woman, about 6 months after, came to claim it with the other half of the napkin. This woman gave all the requisite particulars, and it was entrusted to her. But you should have inquired for the woman. You should have traced her. And what do you think I did? I feigned a criminal process and employed all the most acute bloodhounds and skilful agents in search of her. They traced her to Chalon, and there they lost her. They lost her? Yes, forever. Madame Danglars had listened to this recital with a sigh, a tear, or a shriek for every detail. "And this is all?" said she. "And you stopped there?" "Oh, no," said Villefort. "I never ceased to search and to inquire. However, the last 2 or 3 years I had allowed myself some respite, but now I will begin with more perseverance and fury than ever, since fear urges me, not my conscience." "But," replied Madame Danglars, "the Count of Monte Cristo can know nothing, or he would not seek out our society as he does." "Oh, the wickedness of man is very great," said Villefort, "since it surpasses the goodness of God. Did you observe that man's eyes while he was speaking to us?" "No." "But have you ever watched him carefully?" "Doubtless he is capricious, but that is all. One thing alone struck me. Of all the exquisite things he placed before us, he touched nothing. I might have suspected he was poisoning us." "And you see you would have been deceived." "Yes, doubtless." "But believe me, that man has other projects. For that reason I wish to see you, to speak to you, to warn you against everyone, but especially against him. Tell me," cried Villefort, fixing his eyes more steadfastly on her than he had ever done before, "did you ever reveal to anyone our connection?" "Never, to anyone." "You understand me," replied Villefort affectionately. "When I say anyone, pardon my urgency, to anyone living, I mean." "Yes, yes, I understand very well," ejaculated the Baroness. "Never, I swear to you." "Were you ever in the habit of writing in the evening what had transpired in the morning? Do you keep a journal?" "No, my life has been passed in frivolity. I wish to forget it myself." "Do you talk in your sleep?" "I sleep soundly, like a child. Do you not remember?" The color mounted to the Baroness's face, and Villefort turned awfully pale. "It is true," said he, in so low a tone that he could hardly be heard. "Well?" said the Baroness. "Well, I understand what I now have to do," replied Villefort. "In less than 1 week from this time I will ascertain who this Monsieur de Monte Cristo is, whence he comes, where he goes, and why he speaks in our presence of children that have been disinterred in a garden." Villefort pronounced these words with an accent which would have made the Count shudder had he heard him. Then he pressed the hand the Baroness reluctantly gave him, and led her respectfully back to the door. Madame Danglars returned in another cab to the passage, on the other side of which she found her carriage and her coachman sleeping peacefully on the box while waiting for her. End of chapter 67.
Chapter 68. A Summer Ball. The same day, during the interview between Madame Danglars and the procureur, a travelling carriage entered the Rue de Helder, passed through the gateway of number 27, and stopped in the yard. In a moment the door was opened, and Madame de Morcerf alighted, leaning on her son's arm. Albert soon left her, ordered his horses, and having arranged his toilette, drove to the Champs-Élysées, to the house of Monte Cristo. The Count received him with his habitual smile. It was a strange thing that no one ever appeared to advance a step in that man's favor. Those who would, as it were, force a passage to his heart, found an impassable barrier. Morcerf, who ran towards him with open arms, was chilled as he drew near, in spite of the friendly smile, and simply held out his hand. Monte Cristo shook it coldly, according to his invariable practice. "Here I am, dear Count." "Welcome home again." "I arrived an hour since." "From Dieppe?" "No, from Traitor." "Indeed." "And I have come at once to see you." "That is extremely kind of you," said Monte Cristo, with a tone of perfect indifference. "And what is the news?" You should not ask a stranger, a foreigner, for news." "I know it, but in asking for news, I mean, have you done anything for me?" "Had you commissioned me?" said Monte Cristo, feigning uneasiness. "Come, come," said Albert, "do not assume so much indifference. It is said sympathy travels rapidly, and when at Traitor I felt the electric shock, you have either been working for me or thinking of me." "Possibly," said Monte Cristo. "I have indeed thought of you, but the magnetic wire I was guiding acted, indeed, without my knowledge." "Indeed? Pray tell me how it happened." "Willingly. Monsieur Danglars dined with me." "I know it. To avoid meeting him, my mother and I left town." "But he met here Monsieur Andrea Cavalcanti." "Your Italian prince?" "Not so fast. Monsieur Andrea only calls himself Count." "Calls himself, do you say?" "Yes, calls himself." "Is he not a count?" "What can I know of him? He calls himself so. I, of course, give him the same title, and everyone else does likewise." "What a strange man you are! What next? You say Monsieur Danglars dined here?" "Yes, with Count Cavalcanti, the Marquis his father, Madame Danglars, Monsieur and Madame de Villefort, charming people, Monsieur Debray, Maximilien Morel, and Monsieur de Château Renaud." "Did they speak of me?" "Not a word." "So much the worse." "Why so? I thought you wished them to forget you." "If they did not speak of me, I am sure they thought about me, and I am in despair." "How will that affect you, since Mademoiselle Danglars was not among the number here who thought of you? Truly, she might have thought of you at home." "I have no fear of that, or, if she did, it was only in the same way in which I think of her." "Touching sympathy. So you hate each other?" said the Count. "Listen," said Morcerf. "If Mademoiselle Danglars were disposed to take pity on my supposed martyrdom on her account, and would dispense with all matrimonial formalities between our two families, I am ready to agree to the arrangement. In a word, Mademoiselle Danglars would make a charming mistress, but a wife? Diable!" "And this," said Monte Cristo, "is your opinion of your intended spouse?" "Yes. It is rather unkind, I acknowledge, but it is true. But as this dream cannot be realized, since Mademoiselle Danglars must become my lawful wife, live perpetually with me, sing to me, compose verses and music within 10 paces of me, and that for my whole life, it frightens me. One may forsake a mistress, but a wife? Good heavens! There she must always be, and to marry Mademoiselle Danglars would be awful." "You are difficult to please, Viscount." "Yes, for I often wish for what is impossible." "What is that?" "To find such a wife as my father found." Monte Cristo turned pale and looked at Albert, while playing with some magnificent pistols. "Your father was fortunate, then?" said he. "You know my opinion of my mother, Count. Look at her, still beautiful, witty, more charming than ever. For any other son to have stayed with his mother for 4 days at Traitor, it would have been a condescension or a martyrdom, while I return more contented, more peaceful, shall I say more poetic, than if I had taken Queen Mab or Titania as my companion." "That is an overwhelming demonstration, and you would make everyone vow to live a single life." "Such are my reasons for not liking to marry Mademoiselle Danglars. Have you ever noticed how much a thing is heightened in value when we obtain possession of it? The diamond which glittered in the window at Marseilles or Fossin's shines with more splendor when it is our own. But if we are compelled to acknowledge the superiority of another, and still must retain the one that is inferior, do you not know what we have to endure?" "Worldling," murmured the Count. Thus I shall rejoice when Mademoiselle Eugénie perceives I am but a pitiful atom, with scarcely as many 100,000 francs as she has millions." Monte Cristo smiled. "One plan occurred to me," continued Albert. "Franz likes all that is eccentric. I tried to make him fall in love with Mademoiselle Danglars, but in spite of 4 letters, written in the most alluring style, he invariably answered, 'My eccentricity may be great, but it will not make me break my promise.'" "That is what I call devoted friendship, to recommend to another whom you would not marry yourself." Albert smiled. "Apropos," continued he, "Franz is coming soon, but it will not interest you. You dislike him, I think." "I?" said Monte Cristo. "My dear Viscount, how have you discovered that I did not like Monsieur Franz? I like everyone." "And you include me in the expression everyone. Many thanks." "Let us not mistake," said Monte Cristo. "I love everyone as God commands us to love our neighbor, as Christians. But I thoroughly hate but a few. Let us return to Monsieur Franz d'Épinay. Did you say he was coming?" "Yes, summoned by Monsieur de Villefort, who is apparently as anxious to get Mademoiselle Valentine married as Monsieur Danglars is to see Mademoiselle Eugénie settled." "It must be a very irksome office to be the father of a grown-up daughter. It seems to make one feverish, and to raise one's pulse to 90 beats a minute until the deed is done." "But Monsieur d'Épinay, unlike you, bears his misfortune patiently. Still more, he talks seriously about the matter, puts on a white tie, and speaks of his family. He entertains a very high opinion of Monsieur and Madame de Villefort." "Which they deserve, do they not?" "I believe they do. Monsieur de Villefort has always passed for a severe but a just man." "There is then one," said Monte Cristo, "whom you do not condemn like poor Danglars." "Because I am not compelled to marry his daughter, perhaps," replied Albert, laughing. "Indeed, my dear sir," said Monte Cristo, "you are revoltingly foppish." "I foppish? How do you mean?" "Yes, pray take a cigar, and cease to defend yourself, and to struggle to escape marrying Mademoiselle Danglars. Let things take their course. Perhaps you may not have to retract." "Bah!" said Albert, staring. "Doubtless, my dear Viscount, you will not be taken by force. And seriously, do you wish to break off your engagement?" "I would give 100,000 francs to be able to do so." "Then make yourself quite easy. Monsieur Danglars would give double that sum to attain the same end." "Am I indeed so happy?" said Albert, who still could not prevent an almost imperceptible cloud passing across his brow. "But, my dear Count, has Monsieur Danglars any reason?" "Ah, there is your proud and selfish nature. You would expose the self-love of another with a hatchet, but you shrink if your own is attacked with a needle." "But yet Monsieur Danglars appeared delighted with you, was he not?" "Well, he is a man of bad taste, and is still more enchanted with another. I know not whom. Look and judge for yourself." "Thank you, I understand. But my mother— No, not my mother. I mistake. My father intends giving a ball." "A ball at this season? Summer balls are fashionable." "If they were not, the Countess has only to wish it, and they would become so." "You are right. You know they are select affairs. Those who remain in Paris in July must be true Parisians. Will you take charge of our invitation to Messieurs Cavalcanti?" "When will it take place?" "On Saturday." "Monsieur Cavalcanti's father will be gone." "But the son will be here. Will you invite young Monsieur Cavalcanti?" "I do not know him, Viscount." "You do not know him?" "No, I never saw him until a few days since, and am not responsible for him." "But you receive him at your house?" "That is another thing. He was recommended to me by a good abbé who may be deceived. Give him a direct invitation, but do not ask me to present him. If he were afterwards to marry Mademoiselle Danglars, you would accuse me of intrigue, and would be challenging me. Besides, I may not be there myself." "Where?" "At your ball." "Why should you not be there?" "Because you have not yet invited me." "But I come expressly for that purpose." "You are very kind, but I may be prevented." "If I tell you one thing, you will be so amiable as to set aside all impediments." "Tell me what it is." "My mother begs you to come." "The Comtesse de Morcerf?" said Monte Cristo, starting. "Ah, Count," said Albert, "I assure you Madame de Morcerf speaks freely to me, and if you have not felt those sympathetic fibres of which I spoke just now thrill within you, you must be entirely devoid of them, for during the last 4 days we have spoken of no one else." "You have talked of me?" "Yes, that is the penalty of being a living puzzle." "Then I am also a puzzle to your mother? I should have thought her too reasonable to be led by imagination." "A problem, my dear Count, for everyone, for my mother as well as others. Much studied, but not solved. You still remain an enigma. Do not fear." "My mother is only astonished that you remain so long unsolved. I believe, while the Countess G. takes you for Lord Ruthven, my mother imagines you to be Cagliostro or the Count Saint-Germain. The first opportunity you have, confirm her in her opinion. It will be easy for you, as you have the philosophy of the one and the wit of the other." "I thank you for the warning," said the Count. "I shall endeavor to be prepared for all suppositions." "You will, then, come on Saturday?" "Yes, since Madame de Morcerf invites me." "You are very kind." "Will Monsieur Danglars be there?" "He has already been invited by my father. We shall try to persuade the great d'Aguesseau, Monsieur de Villefort, to come, but have not much hope of seeing him." "Never despair of anything," says the proverb. "Do you dance, Count?" "I dance?" "Yes, you. It would not be astonishing." "That is very well before one is over 40. No, I do not dance, but I like to see others do so." "Does Madame de Morcerf dance?" "Never. You can talk to her. She so delights in your conversation." "Indeed?" "Yes, truly, and I assure you, you are the only man of whom I have heard her speak with interest." Albert rose and took his hat. The Count conducted him to the door. "I have one thing to reproach myself with," said he, stopping Albert on the steps. "What is it?" "I have spoken to you indiscreetly about Danglars. On the contrary, speak to me always in the same strain about him." "I am glad to be reassured on that point." "Apropos, when do you expect Monsieur d'Épinay?" 5 or 6 days hence at the latest." "And when is he to be married?" "Immediately on the arrival of Monsieur and Madame de Saint-Méran." "Bring him to see me. Although you say I do not like him, I assure you I shall be happy to see him." "I will obey your orders, my lord. Good-bye." "Until Saturday, when I may expect you, may I not?" "Yes, I promised you." The Count watched Albert, waving his hand to him. When he had mounted his phaeton, Monte Cristo turned, and seeing Bertuccio, "What news?" said he. "She went to the Palais," replied the steward. "Did she stay long there?" "An hour and a half." "Did she return home?" "Directly." "Well, my dear Bertuccio," said the Count, "I now advise you to go in quest of the little estate I spoke to you of in Normandy." Bertuccio bowed, and as his wishes were in perfect harmony with the order he had received, he started the same evening. End of chapter 68. Chapter 69. The Inquiry. Monsieur de Villefort kept the promise he had made to Madame Danglars to endeavour to find out how the Count of Monte Cristo had discovered the history of the house at Auteuil. He wrote the same day for the required information to Monsieur de Beauville, who, from having been an inspector of prisons, was promoted to a high office in the police, and the latter begged for 2 days' time to ascertain exactly who would be most likely to give him full particulars. At the end of the second day, Monsieur de Villefort received the following note: "The person called the Count of Monte Cristo is an intimate acquaintance of Lord Wilmore, a rich foreigner, who is sometimes seen in Paris, and who is there at this moment. He is also known to the Abbé Busoni, a Sicilian priest, of high repute in the East, where he has done much good." Monsieur de Villefort replied by ordering the strictest inquiries to be made respecting these 2 persons. His orders were executed, and the following evening he received these details: The abbé, who was in Paris only for a month, inhabited a small 2-storied house behind Saint-Sulpice. There were 2 rooms on each floor, and he was the only tenant. The 2 lower rooms consisted of a dining room, with a table, chairs, and sideboard of walnut, and a wainscoted parlour, without ornaments, carpet, or timepiece. It was evident that the abbé limited himself to objects of strict necessity. He preferred to use the sitting-room upstairs, which was more library than parlour, and was furnished with theological books and parchments, in which he delighted to bury himself for months at a time, according to his valet de chambre. His valet looked at the visitors through a sort of wicket, and if their faces were unknown to him or displeased him, he replied that the abbé was not in Paris, an answer which satisfied most persons, because the abbé was known to be a great traveller. Besides, whether at home or not, whether in Paris or Cairo, the abbé always left something to give away, which the valet distributed through this wicket in his master's name. The other room near the library was a bedroom, a bed without curtains, 4 armchairs and a couch, covered with yellow Utrecht velvet, composed with a prie-dieu all its furniture. Lord Wilmore resided in Rue Fontaine, Saint-Georges. He was one of those English tourists who consume a large fortune in travelling. He hired the apartment in which he lived furnished, passed only a few hours in the day there, and rarely slept there. One of his peculiarities was never to speak a word of French, which he, however, wrote with great facility. The day after this important information had been given to the king's attorney, a man alighted from a carriage at the corner of the Rue Férou, and rapping at an olive-green door, asked if the Abbé Busoni were within. "No, he went out early this morning," replied the valet. "I might not always be content with that answer," replied the visitor, "for I come from one to whom everyone must be at home. But have the kindness to give the Abbé Busoni—" "I told you he was not at home," repeated the valet. "Then on his return give him that card and this sealed paper. Will he be home at 8 o'clock this evening?" "Doubtless, unless he is at work, which is the same as if he were out." "I will come again at that time," replied the visitor, who then retired. At the appointed hour the same man returned in the same carriage, which, instead of stopping this time at the end of the Rue Férou, drove up to the green door. He knocked, and it opened immediately to admit him. From the signs of respect the valet paid him, he saw that his note had produced a good effect. "Is the abbé at home?" he asked. "Yes, he is at work in his library, but he expects you, sir," replied the valet. The stranger ascended a rough staircase, and before a table illumined by a lamp whose light was concentrated by a large shade while the rest of the apartment was in partial darkness, he perceived the abbé in a monk's dress, with a cowl on his head, such as was used by learned men of the Middle Ages. "Have I the honor of addressing the Abbé Busoni?" asked the visitor. "Yes, sir," replied the abbé. "And you are the person whom Monsieur de Beauville, formerly an inspector of prisons, sends to me from the prefect of police?" "Exactly, sir." "One of the agents appointed to secure the safety of Paris?" "Yes, sir," replied the stranger, with a slight hesitation and blushing. The abbé replaced the large spectacles, which covered not only his eyes but his temples, and sitting down motioned to his visitor to do the same. "I am at your service, sir," said the abbé, with a marked Italian accent. "The mission with which I am charged, sir," replied the visitor, speaking with hesitation, "is a confidential one on the part of him who fulfills it, and him by whom he is employed." The abbé bowed. "Your probity," replied the stranger, "is so well known to the prefect that he wishes as a magistrate to ascertain from you some particulars connected with the public safety, to ascertain which I am deputed to see you. It is hoped that no ties of friendship or humane consideration will induce you to conceal the truth." "Provided, sir, the particulars you wish for do not interfere with my scruples or my conscience. I am a priest, sir, and the secrets of confession, for instance, must remain between me and God, and not between me and human justice." "Do not alarm yourself, monsieur. We will duly respect your conscience." At this moment the abbé pressed down his side of the shade, and so raised it on the other, throwing a bright light on the stranger's face, while his own remained obscured. "Excuse me, abbé," said the envoy of the prefect of the police, "but the light tries my eyes very much." The abbé lowered the shade. "Now, sir, I am listening. Go on." "I will come at once to the point. Do you know the Count of Monte Cristo?" "You mean Monsieur Zaccone, I presume." "Zaccone? Is not his name Monte Cristo?" "Monte Cristo is the name of an estate, or rather of a rock, and not a family name." "Well, be it so. Let us not dispute about words. And since Monsieur de Monte Cristo and Monsieur Zaccone are the same—" "Absolutely the same." "Let us speak of Monsieur Zaccone." "Agreed." "I asked you if you knew him?" "Extremely well." "Who is he?" "The son of a rich shipbuilder in Malta." "I know that is the report, but as you are aware, the police does not content itself with vague reports." "However," replied the abbé, with an affable smile, "when that report is in accordance with the truth, everybody must believe it, the police as well as all the rest." "Are you sure of what you assert?" "What do you mean by that question?" "Understand, sir, I do not in the least suspect your veracity. I ask if you are certain of it." "I knew his father, Monsieur Zaccone." "Ah, indeed?" "And when a child, I often played with the son in the timber yards." "But whence does he derive the title of Count?" "You are aware that may be bought." "In Italy?" "Everywhere." "And his immense riches, whence does he procure them?" "They may not be so very great." "How much do you suppose he possesses?" "From 150 to 200,000 livres per annum." "That is reasonable," said the visitor. "I have heard he had 3 or 4 millions." 200,000 per annum would make 4 millions of capital." "But I was told he had 4 millions per annum." "That is not probable." "Do you know this island of Monte Cristo?" "Certainly. Everyone who has come from Palermo, Naples, or Rome to France by sea must know it, since he has passed close to it and must have seen it." "I'm told it is a delightful place." "It is a rock." "And why has the Count bought a rock?" "For the sake of being a count. In Italy one must have territorial possessions to be a count." You have doubtless heard the adventures of Monsieur Zacconi's youth?" "The father's?" "No, the son's." "I know nothing certain. At that period of his life I lost sight of my young comrade." "Was he in the wars?" "I think he entered the service." "In what branch?" "In the navy." "Are you not his confessor?" "No, sir. I believe he is a Lutheran." "A Lutheran?" "I say, I believe such is the case. I do not affirm it. Besides, liberty of conscience is established in France." "Doubtless, and we are not now inquiring into his creed, but his actions. In the name of the prefect of police, I ask you what you know of him." "He passes for a very charitable man. Our Holy Father, the Pope, has made him a Knight of Jesus Christ for the services he rendered to the Christians in the East. He has 5 or 6 rings as testimonials from Eastern monarchs of his services." "Does he wear them?" "No, but he is proud of them. He is better pleased with rewards given to the benefactors of man than to his destroyers." "He is a Quaker, then?" "Exactly. He is a Quaker, with the exception of the peculiar dress." "Has he any friends?" "Yes, everyone who knows him is his friend." "But has he any enemies?" "One only." "What is his name?" "Lord Wilmore." "Where is he?" "He is in Paris just now." "Can he give me any particulars?" "Important ones. He was in India with Zaccone." "Do you know his abode?" "It's somewhere in the Chaussée d'Antin, but I know neither the street nor the number." "Are you at variance with the Englishman?" "I love Zaccone, and he hates him. We are consequently not friends." "Do you think the Count of Monte Cristo had ever been in France before he made this visit to Paris?" "To that question I can answer positively. No, sir, he had not, because he applied to me 6 months ago for the particulars he required, and as I did not know when I might again come to Paris, I recommended Monsieur Cavalcanti to him." "Andrea?" "No, Bartolomeo, his father." "Now, sir, I have but one question more to ask, and I charge you, in the name of honor, of humanity, and of religion, to answer me candidly." "What is it, sir?" "Do you know with what design Monsieur de Monte Cristo purchased a house at Auteuil?" "Certainly, for he told me." "What is it, sir?" "To make a lunatic asylum of it, similar to that founded by the Count of Pisani at Palermo. Do you know about that institution?" "I have heard of it." "It is a magnificent charity." Having said this, the Abbé bowed to imply he wished to pursue his studies. The visitor either understood the Abbé's meaning, or had no more questions to ask. He arose, and the Abbé accompanied him to the door. "You are a great almsgiver," said the visitor, "and although you are said to be rich, I will venture to offer you something for your poor people. Will you accept my offering?" "I thank you, sir. I am only jealous in one thing, and that is that the relief I give should be entirely from my own resources. However, my resolution, sir, is unchangeable. But you have only to search for yourself, and you will find, alas, but too many objects upon whom to exercise your benevolence." The Abbé once more bowed as he opened the door. The stranger bowed and took his leave, and the carriage conveyed him straight to the house of M. de Villefort. An hour afterwards the carriage was again ordered, and this time it went to the Rue Fontaine Saint-Georges, and stopped at No. 5, where Lord Wilmore lived. The stranger had written to Lord Wilmore, requesting an interview, which the latter had fixed for 10 o'clock. As the envoy of the prefect of police arrived 10 minutes before 10, he was told that Lord Wilmore, who was precision and punctuality personified, was not yet come in, but that he would be sure to return as the clock struck. The visitor was introduced into the drawing-room, which was like all other furnished drawing-rooms: a mantelpiece with 2 modern Sèvres vases, a timepiece representing Cupid with his bent bow, a mirror with an engraving on each side, one representing Homer carrying his guide, the other Belisarius begging, a greyish paper, red and black tapestry. Such was the appearance of Lord Wilmore's drawing-room. It was illuminated by lamps with ground glass shades, which gave only a feeble light, as if out of consideration for the envoy's weak sight. After 10 minutes' expectation, the clock struck 10. At the 5th stroke the door opened, and Lord Wilmore appeared. He was rather above the middle height, with thin reddish whiskers, light complexion, and light hair, turning rather grey. He was dressed with all the English peculiarity, namely, in a blue coat with gilt buttons and high collar, in the fashion of 1811, a white kerseymere waistcoat, and nankeen pantaloons 3 inches too short, but which were prevented by straps from slipping up to the knee. His first remark on entering was, "You know, sir, I do not speak French." "I know you do not like to converse in our language," replied the envoy. "But you may use it," replied Lord Wilmore. "I understand it." "And I," replied the visitor, changing his idiom, "know enough of English to keep up the conversation. Do not put yourself to the slightest inconvenience." "Ah," said Lord Wilmore, with that tone which is only known to natives of Great Britain. The envoy presented his letter of introduction, which the latter read with English coolness, and having finished, "I understand," said he, "perfectly." Then began the questions, which were similar to those which had been addressed to the Abbé Busoni, but as Lord Wilmore, in the character of the Count's enemy, was less restrained in his answers, they were more numerous. He described the youth of Monte Cristo, who, he said, at 10 years of age, entered the service of one of the petty sovereigns of India, who make war on the English. It was there Wilmore had first met him and fought against him, and in that war Zuccone had been taken prisoner, sent to England, and consigned to the hulks, whence he had escaped by swimming. Then began his travels, his duels, his caprices. Then the insurrection in Greece broke out, and he had served in the Grecian ranks. While in that service he had discovered a silver mine in the mountains of Thessaly, but he had been careful to conceal it from everyone. After the battle of Navarino, when the Greek government was consolidated, he asked of King Otho a mining grant for that district, which was given him. Hence that immense fortune, which, in Lord Wilmore's opinion, possibly amounted to 1 or 2 millions per annum, a precarious fortune, which might be momentarily lost by the failure of the mine. "But," asked the visitor, "do you know why he came to France?" "He is speculating in railways," said Lord Wilmore, "and as he is an expert chemist and physicist, he has invented a new system of telegraphy, which he is seeking to bring to perfection." "How much does he spend yearly?" asked the prefect. "Not more than 500,000 or 600,000 francs," said Lord Wilmore. "He is a miser." Hatred evidently inspired the Englishman, who, knowing no other reproach to bring on the Count, accused him of avarice. "Do you know his house at Auteuil?" "Certainly." "What do you know respecting it?" "Do you wish to know why he bought it?" "Yes." "The Count is a speculator, who will certainly ruin himself in experiments. He supposes there is in the neighbourhood of the house he has bought a mineral spring equal to those at Bagneres, Luchon, and Cauterets. He is going to turn his house into a Baldhaus, as the Germans term it. He has already dug up all the garden 2 or 3 times to find the famous spring, and, being unsuccessful, he will soon purchase all the contiguous houses. Now, as I dislike him, and hope his railway, his electric telegraph, or his search for baths will ruin him, I am watching for his discomfiture, which must soon take place." "What was the cause of your quarrel?" "When he was in England, he seduced the wife of one of my friends." "Why do you not seek revenge?" "I have already fought 3 duels with him. said the Englishman. "The first with the pistol, the second with the sword, and the third with the sabre." "And what was the result of those duels?" "The first time he broke my arm. The second he wounded me in the breast, and the third time made this large wound." The Englishman turned down his shirt collar and showed a scar whose redness proved to be a recent one. "So that, you see, there is a deadly feud between us." "But," said the envoy, "you do not go about it in the right way to kill him, if I understand you correctly." "Ah?" said the Englishman. "I practice shooting every day, and every other day Grecier comes to my house." This was all the visitor wished to ascertain, or rather all the Englishmen appeared to know. The agent arose, and having bowed to Lord Wilmore, who returned his salutation with the stiff politeness of the English, he retired. Lord Wilmore, having heard the door close after him, returned to his bedroom, where with one hand he pulled off his light hair, his red whiskers, his false jaw, and his wound, to resume the black hair, dark complexion, and pearly teeth of the Count of Monte Cristo. It was M. de Villefort, and not the prefect, who returned to the house of M. de Villefort. The procureur felt more at ease, although he had learned nothing really satisfactory, and, for the first time since the dinner party at Auteuil, he slept soundly. End of chapter 69. Chapter 70. The Ball. It was in the warmest days of July, when in due course of time the Saturday arrived upon which the ball was to take place at M. de Morcerf's. It was 10 o'clock at night. The branches of the great trees in the garden of the Count's house stood out boldly against the azure canopy of heaven, which was studded with golden stars, but where the last fleeting clouds of a vanishing storm yet lingered. From the apartments on the ground floor might be heard the sound of music, with the whirl of the waltz and gallop, while brilliant streams of light shone through the openings of the Venetian blinds. At this moment the garden was only occupied by about 10 servants, who had just received orders from their mistress to prepare the supper, the serenity of the weather continuing to increase. Until now it had been undecided whether the supper should take place in the dining-room or under a long tent erected on the lawn, but the beautiful blue sky, studded with stars, had settled the question in favor of the lawn. The gardens were illuminated with colored lanterns, according to the Italian custom, and as is usual in countries where the luxuries of the table, the rarest of all luxuries in their complete form, are well understood, the supper-table was loaded with wax lights and flowers. At the time the Countess of Morcerf returned to the rooms, after giving her orders, many guests were arriving, more attracted by the charming hospitality of the Countess than by the distinguished position of the Count. For, owing to the good taste of Mercédès, one was sure of finding some devices at her entertainment worthy of describing, or even copying in case of need. Madame Danglars, in whom the events we have related had caused deep anxiety, had hesitated about going to Madame de Morcerf's, when during the morning her carriage happened to meet that of Villefort. The latter made a sign, and when the carriages had drawn close together, said, "You are going to Madame de Morcerf's, are you not?" "No," replied Madame Danglars, "I am too ill." "You are wrong," replied Villefort significantly. "It is important that you should be seen there." "Do you think so?" asked the Baroness. "I do." "In that case I will go." And the two carriages passed on towards their different destinations. Madame Danglars therefore came, not only beautiful in person, but radiant with splendor. She entered by one door, at the time when Mercédès appeared at the door. the Countess took Albert to meet Madame Danglars. He approached, paid her some well-merited compliments on her toilette, and offered his arm to conduct her to a seat. Albert looked around him. "You are looking for my daughter," said the Baroness, smiling. "I confess it," replied Albert. "Could you have been so cruel as not to bring her?" "Calm yourself. She has met Mademoiselle de Villefort, and has taken her arm. See, they are following us, both in white dresses, one with a bouquet of camellias, the other with one of myosotis. But tell me—" "Well, what do you wish to know?" "Will not the Count of Monte Cristo be here tonight?" 17! replied Albert. "What do you mean?" "I only mean that the Count seems the rage," replied the Viscount, smiling, "and that you are the 17th person that has asked me the same question. The Count is in fashion. I congratulate him upon it." "And have you replied to every one as you have to me?" "Ah, to be sure. I have not answered you." "Be satisfied. We shall have this lion. We are among the privileged ones." "Were you at the opera yesterday?" "No." "He was there." "Ah, indeed. And did the eccentric person commit any new originality?" "Can he be seen without doing so? Elssler was dancing the Diable Boiteau. The Greek princess was in ecstasies. After the cachucha, he placed a magnificent ring on the stem of a bouquet, and threw it to the charming danseuse, who, in the third act, to do honor to the gift, reappeared with it on her finger. And the Greek princess, will she be here?" "No, you will be deprived of that pleasure. Her position in the Count's establishment is not sufficiently understood." "Wait, leave me here, and go and speak to Madame de Villefort, who is trying to attract your attention." Albert bowed to Madame Danglars, and advanced towards Madame de Villefort, whose lips opened as he approached. "I wager anything," said Albert, interrupting her, "that I know what you are about to say." "Well, what is it?" "If I guess rightly, will you confess it?" "Yes." "On your honor?" "On my honor." "You were going to ask me if the Count of Monte Cristo had arrived, or was expected." "Not at all. It is not of him that I am now thinking. I was going to ask you if you had received any news of Monsieur Franz." "Yes, yesterday." "What did he tell you?" "That he was leaving at the same time as his letter." "Well, now then, the Count?" "The Count will come. Of that you may be satisfied." "You know that he has another name besides Monte Cristo?" "No, I did not know it." "Monte Cristo is the name of an island, and he has a family name." "I never heard it." "Well, then, I am better informed than you. His name is Zaccone." "It is possible." "He is a Maltese." "That is also possible." "The son of a ship-owner." "Really, you should relate all this aloud. You would have the greatest success." "He served in India, discovered a mine in Thessaly, and comes to Paris to establish a mineral water cure at Auteuil." "Well, I'm sure," said Morcerf, "this is indeed news. Am I allowed to repeat it?" "Yes, but cautiously. Tell one thing at a time, and do not say I told you." "Why so?" "Because it is a secret just discovered." "By whom?" "The police." "Then the news originated—" "At the prefect's last night. Paris, you can understand, is astonished at the sight of such unusual splendor, and the police have made inquiries." "Well, well, nothing more is wanting than to arrest the Count as a vagabond, on the pretext of his being too rich." "Indeed, that doubtless would have happened if his credentials had not been so favorable." "Poor Count! And is he aware of the danger he has been in?" "I think not." "Then it will be but charitable to inform him. When he arrives I will not fail to do so." Just then a handsome young man, with bright eyes, black hair, and glossy moustache, respectfully bowed to Madame de Villefort. Albert extended his hand. "Madame," said Albert, "allow me to present to you Monsieur Maximilien Morel, captain of Spahis, one of our best, and above all, of our bravest officers." I have already had the pleasure of meeting this gentleman at Auteuil, at the house of the Count of Monte Cristo," replied Madame de Villefort, turning away with marked coldness of manner. This answer, and especially the tone in which it was uttered, chilled the heart of poor Morel. But a recompense was in store for him. Turning around, he saw near the door a beautiful fair face, whose large blue eyes were, without any marked expression, fixed upon him, while the bouquet of myosotis was gently raised to her lips. The salutation was so well understood that Morel, with the same expression in his eyes, placed the handkerchief to his mouth, and these two living statues, whose hearts beat so violently under their marble aspect, separated from each other by the whole length of the room, forgot themselves for a moment, or rather forgot the world in their mutual contemplation. They might have remained much longer lost in one another without anyone noticing their abstraction. The Count of Monte Cristo had just entered. We have already said that there was something in the Count which attracted universal attention wherever he appeared. It was not the coat, unexceptional in its cut, though simple and unornamented. It was not the plain white waistcoat. It was not the trousers that displayed the foot so perfectly formed. It was none of these things that attracted the attention. It was his pale complexion, his waving black hair, his calm and serene expression, his dark and melancholy eye, his mouth, chiseled with such marvelous delicacy, which so easily expressed such high disdain. These were what fixed the attention of all upon him. Many men might have been handsomer, but certainly there could be none whose appearance was more significant, if the expression may be used. Everything about the Count seemed to have its meaning, for the constant habit of thought which he had acquired had given an ease and vigor to the expression of his face, and even to the most trifling gesture scarcely to be understood. Yet the Parisian world is so strange that even all this might not have won attention had there not been connected with it a mysterious story gilded by an immense fortune. Meanwhile, he advanced through the assemblage of guests under a battery of curious glances towards Madame de Morcerf, who, standing before a mantelpiece ornamented with flowers, had seen his entrance in a looking-glass placed opposite the door, and was prepared to receive him. She turned towards him with a serene smile just at the moment he was bowing to her. No doubt she fancied the Count would speak to her, while on his side the Count thought she was about to address him, but both remained silent, and after a mere bow, Monte Cristo directed his steps to Albert, who received him cordially. "Have you seen my mother?" asked Albert. "I have just had the pleasure," replied the Count, "but I have not seen your father." "See, he is down there, talking politics with that little group of great geniuses." "Indeed," said Monte Cristo. "And so those gentlemen down there are men of great talent? I should not have guessed it. And for what kind of talent are they celebrated? You know there are different sorts." "That tall, harsh-looking man is very learned. He discovered in the neighborhood of Rome a kind of lizard with a vertebra, more than lizards usually have, and he immediately laid his discovery before the Institute. The thing was discussed for a long time, but finally decided in his favor. I can assure you that the vertebra made a great noise in the learned world, and the gentleman, who was only a knight of the Legion of Honor, was made an officer." "Come," said Monte Cristo, "this cross seems to me to be wisely awarded. I suppose, had he found another additional vertebra, they would have made him a commander?" "Very likely," said Albert. "And who can that person be who has taken it into his head to wrap himself up in a blue coat embroidered with green?" "Oh, that coat is not his own idea. It is the Republic's, which deputed David to devise a uniform for the academicians." "Indeed," said Monte Cristo. "So this gentleman is an academician?" "Within the last week he has been made one of the learned assembly." And what is his especial talent?" "His talent? I believe he thrusts pins through the head of rabbits. He makes fowls eat madder, and punches the spinal marrow out of dogs with whalebone." "And he is made a member of the Academy of Sciences for this." "No, of the French Academy. But what has the French Academy to do with all this?" "I was going to tell you. It seems—" "That his experiments have very considerably advanced the cause of science, doubtless." "No, that his style of writing is very good." "This must be very flattering to the feelings of the rabbits into whose heads he has thrust pins, to the fowls whose bones he has dyed red, and to the dogs whose spinal marrow he has punched out." Albert laughed. "And the other one?" demanded the Count. "That one?" "Yes, the third. The one in the dark blue coat?" "Yes." "He is a colleague of the Count, and one of the most active opponents to the idea of providing the Chamber of Peers with a uniform. He was very successful upon that question. He stood badly with the Liberal papers, but his noble opposition to the wishes of the court is now getting him into favor with the journalists. They talk of making him an ambassador." "And what are his claims to the peerage?" "He has composed 2 or 3 comic operas, written 4 or 5 articles in the Siècle, and voted 5 or 6 years on the ministerial side." "Bravo, Viscount," said Monte Cristo, smiling. "You are a delightful cicerone. And now you will do me a favor, will you not?" "What is it?" "Do not introduce me to any of these gentlemen, and should they wish it, you will warn me." Just then the Count felt his arm pressed. He turned round. It was Danglars. "Ah, is it you, Baron?" said he. "Why do you call me Baron?" said Danglars. "You know that I care nothing for my title. I am not like you, Viscount. You like your title, do you not?" "Certainly," replied Albert, "seeing that without my title I should be nothing, while you, sacrificing the Baron, would still remain the millionaire." "Which seems to me the finest title under the royalty of July," replied Danglars. "Unfortunately," said Monte Cristo, "one's title to a millionaire does not last for life. Like that of Baron, peer of France, or academician, for example the millionaires Frank and Poulman, of Frankfurt, who have just become bankrupts." "Indeed?" said Danglars, becoming pale. "Yes, I received the news this evening by courier. I had about 1 million in their hands, but, warned in time, I withdrew it a month ago." "Ah, mon Dieu!" exclaimed Danglars, "they have drawn on me for 200,000 francs." "Well, you can throw out the draft. Their signature is worth 5%. "Yes, but it is too late," said Danglars. "I have honored their bills." "Then," said Monte Cristo, "here are 200,000 francs gone after." "Hush! Do not mention these things," said Danglars. Then, approaching Monte Cristo, he added, "especially before young Monsieur Cavalcanti." After which he smiled, and turned towards the young man in question. Albert had left the Count to speak to his mother, Danglars to converse with young Cavalcanti. Monte Cristo was for an instant alone. Meanwhile, the heat became excessive. Footmen were hastening through the rooms with waiters loaded with ices. Monte Cristo wiped the perspiration from his forehead, but drew back when the waiter was presented to him. He took no refreshment. Madame de Morcerf did not lose sight of Monte Cristo. She saw that he took nothing, and even noticed his gesture of refusal. "Albert," she asked, "did you notice that?" "What, mother?" "That the Count has never been willing to partake of food under the roof of Monsieur de Morcerf." "Yes, but then he breakfasted with me. Indeed, he made his first appearance in the world on that occasion." "But your house is not Monsieur de Morcerf's," murmured Mercédès, "and since he has been here, I have watched him." "Well?" "Well, he has taken nothing yet. The Count is very temperate." Mercédès smiled sadly. "Approach him," said she, "and when the next waiter passes, insist upon his taking something." "But why, mother?" "Just to please me, Albert," said Mercédès. Albert kissed his mother's hand and drew near the Count. Another salver passed, loaded like the preceding ones. She saw Albert attempt to persuade the Count, but he obstinately refused. Albert rejoined his mother. She was very pale. "Well," said she, "you see he refuses." "Yes, but why need this annoy you?" "You know, Albert, women are singular creatures. I should like to have seen the Count take something in my house, if only an ice. Perhaps he cannot reconcile himself to the French style of living, and might prefer something else." "Oh, no, I have seen him eat of everything in Italy. No doubt he does not feel inclined this evening." "And besides," said the Countess, "accustomed as he is to burning climates, possibly he does not feel the heat as we do." "I do not think that, for he has complained of feeling almost suffocated, and asked why the Venetian blinds were not opened, as well as the windows." "In a word," said Mercédès, "it was a way of assuring me that his abstinence was intended." And she left the room. A minute afterwards the blinds were thrown open, and through the jessamine and clematis that overhung the window one could see the garden ornamented with lanterns, and the supper laid under the tent. Dancers, players, talkers, all uttered an exclamation of joy. Everyone inhaled with delight the breeze that floated in. At the same time Mercédès reappeared, paler than before, but with that imperturbable expression of countenance which she sometimes wore. She went straight to the group of which her husband formed the centre. "Do not detain those gentlemen here, Count," she said. "They would prefer, I should think, to breathe in the garden rather than suffocate here, since they are not playing." "Ah," said a gallant old general, who in 1809 had sung Partant pour la Syrie, "we will not go alone to the garden." "Then," said Mercédès, "I will lead the way." Turning towards Monte Cristo, she added, "Count, will you oblige me with your arm?" The Count almost staggered at these simple words. Then he fixed his eyes on Mercédès. It was only a momentary glance, but it seemed to the Countess to have lasted for a century. So much was expressed in that one look. He offered his arm to the Countess. She took it, or rather just touched it with her little hand, and they together descended the steps, lined with rhododendrons and camellias. Behind them, by another outlet, a group of about 20 persons rushed into the garden with loud exclamations of delight. End of chapter 70.
Chapter 71. Bread and Salt. Madame de Morcerf entered an archway of trees with her companion. It led through a grove of lindens to a conservatory. "It was too warm in the room, was it not, Count?" she asked. "Yes, madame, and it was an excellent idea of yours to open the doors and the blinds." As he ceased speaking, the Count felt the hand of Mercédès tremble. "But you," he said, "with that light dress and without anything to cover you but that gauze scarf, perhaps you feel cold?" "Do you know where I am leading you?" said the Countess, without replying to the question. "No, madame," replied Monte Cristo, "but you see I make no resistance." "We are going to the greenhouse that you see at the other end of the grove." The Count looked at Mercédès, as if to interrogate her, but she continued to walk on in silence, and he refrained from speaking. They reached the building, ornamented with magnificent fruits, which ripen at the beginning of July in the artificial temperature which takes the place of the sun, so frequently absent in our climate. The Countess left the arm of Monte Cristo and gathered a bunch of muscatel grapes. "See, Count," she said, with a smile so sad in its expression that one could almost detect the tears on her eyelids. "See, our French grapes are not to be compared, I know, with yours of Sicily and Cyprus. But you will make allowance for our northern sun?" The Count bowed, but stepped back. "Do you refuse?" said Mercédès in a tremulous voice. "Pray excuse me, madame," replied Monte Cristo, "but I never eat muscatel grapes." Mercédès let them fall, and sighed. A magnificent peach was hanging against an adjoining wall, ripened by the same artificial heat. Mercedes drew near and plucked the fruit. "Take this peach, then," she said. The Count again refused. "What, again?" she exclaimed, in so plaintive an accent that it seemed to stifle a sob. "Really, you pain me." A long silence followed. The peach, like the grapes, fell to the ground. "Count," added Mercedes with a supplicating glance, "there is a beautiful Arabian custom which makes eternal friends of those who have together eaten bread and salt under the same roof." "I know it, madame," replied the Count, "but we are in France and not in Arabia, and in France eternal friendships are as rare as the custom of dividing bread and salt with one another." "But," said the Countess breathlessly, with her eyes fixed on Monte Cristo, whose arm she convulsively pressed with both hands, "we are friends, are we not?" The Count became pale as death, the blood rushed to his heart, and then again, rising, dyed his cheeks with crimson. His eyes swam like those of a man suddenly dazzled. "Certainly we are friends," he replied. "Why should we not be?" The answer was so little like the one Mercedes desired that she turned away to give vent to a sigh, which sounded more like a groan. "Thank you," she said, and they walked on again. They went the whole length of the garden without uttering a word. "Sir," suddenly exclaimed the Countess, after their walk had continued 10 minutes in silence, "is it true that you have seen so much, traveled so far, and suffered so deeply?" "I have suffered deeply, madame," answered Monte Cristo. "But now you are happy?" "Doubtless," replied the Count, "since no one hears me complain." "And your present happiness, has it softened your heart?" "My present happiness equals my past misery," said the Count. "Are you not married?" asked the Countess. "I married?" exclaimed Monte Cristo, shuddering. "Who could have told you so?" "No one told me you were, but you have frequently been seen at the opera with a young and lovely woman." "She is a slave, whom I bought at Constantinople, madame, the daughter of a prince. I have adopted her as my daughter, having no one else to love in the world." "You live alone, then?" "I do." "You have no sister, no son, no father?" "I have no one." "How can you exist thus without anyone to attach you to life?"
"It is not my fault, madame. At Malta I loved a young girl, was on the point of marrying her, when war came and carried me away. I thought she loved me well enough to wait for me, and even to remain faithful to my memory. When I returned, she was married. This is the history of most men who have passed 20 years of age. Perhaps my heart was weaker than the hearts of most men, and I suffered more than they would have done in my place. That is all." The Countess stopped for a moment, as if gasping for breath. "Yes," she said, "and you have still preserved this love in your heart. One can only love once. And did you ever see her again?" "Never." "Never?" "I never returned to the country where she lived." "To Malta?" "Yes, Malta." "She is, then, now at Malta?" "I think so." "And have you forgiven her for all she has made you suffer?" "Her, yes." "But only her? Do you then still hate those who separated you?" "I hate them? Not at all. Why should I?" The Countess placed herself before Monte Cristo, still holding in her hand a portion of the perfumed grapes. "Take some," she said. "Madame, I never eat muscatel grapes," replied Monte Cristo, as if the subject had not been mentioned before. The Countess dashed the grapes into the nearest thicket, with a gesture of despair. "Inflexible man!" she murmured. Monte Cristo remained as unmoved as if the reproach had not been addressed to him. Albert at this moment ran in. "Oh, mother!" he exclaimed, "such a misfortune has happened!" "What has happened?" asked the Countess, as though awakening from a sleep to the realities of life. "Did you say a misfortune? Indeed, I should expect misfortunes." "Monsieur de Villefort is here." "Well?" "He comes to fetch his wife and daughter." "Why so?" "Because Madame de Saint-Méran is just arrived in Paris, bringing the news of Monsieur de Saint-Méran's death, which took place on the first stage after he left Marseilles. Madame de Villefort, who is in very good spirits, would neither believe nor think of the misfortune, but Mademoiselle Valentine, at the first words, guessed the whole truth,
notwithstanding all the precautions of her father. The blow struck her like a thunderbolt, and she fell senseless. "And how was Monsieur de Saint-Méran related to Mademoiselle de Villefort?" said the Count. "He was her grandfather on the mother's side. He was coming here to hasten her marriage with Franz." "Ah, indeed. So Franz must wait." "Why was not Monsieur de Saint-Méran also grandfather to Mademoiselle Danglers?" "Albert, Albert," said Madame de Morcerf, in a tone of mild reproof, "what are you saying?" "Ah, Count, he esteems you so highly. Tell him that he has spoken amiss." And she took 2 or 3 steps forward. Monte Cristo watched her with an air so thoughtful and so full of affectionate admiration that she turned back and grasped his hand. At the same time, she seized that of her son and joined them together. "We are friends, are we not?" she asked. "Oh, madame, I do not presume to call myself your friend, but at all times I am your most respectful servant." The Countess left with an indescribable pang in her heart, and before she had taken 10 steps, the Count saw her raise her handkerchief to her eyes. "Do not my mother and you agree?" asked Albert, astonished. "On the contrary," replied the Count. "Did you not hear her declare that we were friends?" They re-entered the drawing-room, which Valentine and Madame de Villefort had just quitted. It is perhaps needless to add that Morrel departed almost at the same time. End of chapter 71.
Chapter 72. Madame de Saint-Méran. A gloomy scene had indeed just passed at the house of Monsieur de Villefort. After the ladies had departed for the ball, whither all the entreaties of Madame de Villefort had failed in persuading him to accompany them, the procureur had shut himself up in his study, according to his custom, with a heap of papers calculated to alarm anyone else, but which generally scarcely satisfied his inordinate desires. But this time the papers were a mere matter of form. Villefort had secluded himself, not to study, but to reflect, and with the door locked and orders given that he should not be disturbed excepting for important business, he sat down in his armchair and began to ponder over the events, the remembrance of which had, during the last 8 days, filled his mind with so many gloomy thoughts and bitter recollections. Then, instead of plunging into the mass of documents piled before him, he opened the drawer of his desk, touched a spring, and drew out a parcel of cherished memoranda, amongst which he had carefully arranged, in characters only known to himself, the names of all those who, either in his political career, in money matters, at the bar, or in his mysterious love affairs, had become his enemies. Their number was formidable, now that he had begun to fear, and yet these names, powerful though they were, had often caused him to smile with the same kind of satisfaction experienced by a traveller who, from the summit of a mountain, beholds at his feet the craggy eminences, the almost impassable paths, and the fearful chasms, through which he has so perilously climbed. When he had run over all these names in his memory, again read and studied them, commenting meanwhile upon his lists, he shook his head. "No," he murmured, "none of my enemies would have waited so patiently and laboriously for so long a space of time that they might now come and crush me with this secret. Sometimes, as Hamlet says, foul deeds will rise, though all the earth overwhelm them to men's eyes. But, like a phosphoric light, they rise but to mislead. The story has been told by the Corsican to some priest, who, in his turn, has repeated it. Monsieur de Monte Cristo may have heard it, and, to enlighten himself— But why should he wish to enlighten himself upon the subject? Asked Villefort, after a moment's reflection. What interest can this Monsieur de Monte Cristo, or Monsieur Zaccone, son of a shipowner of Malta, discoverer of a mine in Thessaly, now visiting Paris for the first time, what interest, I say, can he take in discovering a gloomy, mysterious, and useless fact like this? However, among all the incoherent details given to me by the Abbé Bussini and by Lord Wilmore, by that friend and that enemy, one thing appears certain and clear in my opinion, that in no period, in no case, in no circumstance could there have been any contact between him and me. But Villefort uttered words which even he himself did not believe. He dreaded not so much the revelation, for he could reply to or deny its truth. He cared little for that mene, tekel, upharsin, which appeared suddenly in letters of blood upon the wall. But what he was really anxious for was to discover whose hand had traced them. While he was endeavouring to calm his fears, and instead of dwelling upon the political future that had so often been the subject of his ambitious dreams, was imagining a future limited to the enjoyments of home, in fear of awakening the enemy that had so long slept, the noise of a carriage sounded in the yard. Then he heard the steps of an aged person ascending the stairs, followed by tears and lamentations, such as servants always give vent to when they wish to appear interested in their master's grief. He drew back the bolt of his door, and almost directly an old lady entered, unannounced, carrying her shawl on her arm, and her bonnet in her hand. The white hair was thrown back from her yellow forehead, and her eyes, already sunken by the furrows of age, now almost disappeared beneath the eyelids, swollen with grief. "Oh, sir," she said, "oh, sir, what a misfortune! I shall die of it. Oh, yes, I shall certainly die of it." And then, falling upon the chair nearest the door, she burst into a paroxysm of sobs. The servants, standing in the doorway, not daring to approach nearer, were looking at Noirtier's old servant, who had heard the noise from his master's room, and run there also, remaining behind the others. Villefort rose, and ran towards his mother-in-law, for it was she. "Why, what can have happened?" he exclaimed. "What has thus disturbed you? Is Monsieur de Saint-Méran with you?" "Monsieur de Saint-Méran is dead," answered the old Marchioness. Without preface and without expression, she appeared to be stupefied. Villefort drew back, and clasping his hands together, exclaimed, "Dead? So suddenly?" "A week ago," continued Madame de Saint-Méran. "We went out together in the carriage after dinner. Monsieur de Saint-Méran had been unwell for some days. Still, the idea of seeing our dear Valentine again inspired him with courage, and notwithstanding his illness, he would leave. At 6 leagues from Marseilles, after having eaten some of the lozenges he is accustomed to take, he fell into such a deep sleep that it appeared to me unnatural. Still, I hesitated to wake him, although I fancied that his face was flushed, and that the veins of his temples throbbed more violently than usual. However, as it became dark, and I could no longer see, I fell asleep. I was soon aroused by a piercing shriek, as from a person suffering in his dreams, and he suddenly threw his head back violently. I called the valet, I stopped the postilion, I spoke to Monsieur de Saint-Méran, I applied my smelling salts, but all was over, and I arrived at Aix by the side of a corpse." Villefort stood with his mouth half open, quite stupefied. "Of course, you sent for a doctor?" "Immediately, but, as I have told you, it was too late." "Yes, but then he could tell of what complaint the poor Marquise had died." "Oh, yes, sir, he told me. It appears to have been an apoplectic stroke." "And what did you do then?" Monsieur de Saint-Méran had always expressed a desire, in case his death happened during his absence from Paris, that his body might be brought to the family vault. I had him put into a lead coffin, and I am preceding him by a few days." "Oh, my poor mother," said Villefort, "to have such duties to perform at your age, after such a blow. God has supported me through all, and then, my dear Marquise, he would certainly have done everything for me that I performed for him. It is true that since I left him, I seem to have lost my senses. I cannot cry. At my age, they say that we have no more tears. Still, I think that when one is in trouble, one should have the power of weeping. Where is Valentine, sir? It is on her account I am here. I wish to see Valentine. Villefort thought it would be terrible to reply that Valentine was at a ball, so he only said that she had gone out with her stepmother, and that she should be fetched. "This instant, sir, this instant, I beseech you," said the old lady. Villefort placed the arm of Madame de Saint-Méran within his own, and conducted her to his apartment. "Rest yourself, mother," he said. The Marchioness raised her head at this word, and beholding the man who so forcibly reminded her of her deeply regretted child, who still lived for her in Valentine, she felt touched at the name of her mother, and, bursting into tears, she fell on her knees before an armchair, where she buried her venerable head. Villefort left her to the care of the women, while old Barrois ran, half scared, to his master. For nothing frightens old people so much as when death relaxes its vigilance over them for a moment, in order to strike some other old person. Then, while Madame de Saint-Méran remained on her knees, praying fervently, Villefort sent for a cab, and went himself to fetch his wife and daughter from Madame de Morcerf's. He was so pale when he appeared at the door of the ballroom, that Valentine ran to him, saying, "Oh, father, some misfortune has happened." "Your grandmamma has just arrived, Valentine," said Monsieur de Villefort. "And grandpapa?" inquired the young girl, trembling with apprehension. Monsieur de Villefort only replied by offering his arm to his daughter. It was just in time, for Valentine's head swam, and she staggered. Madame de Villefort instantly hastened to her assistance, and aided her husband in dragging her to the carriage, saying, "What a singular event! Who could have thought it? Ah, yes, it is indeed strange." And the wretched family departed, leaving a cloud of sadness hanging over the rest of the evening. At the foot of the stairs, Valentine found Barrois awaiting her. "Monsieur Noirtier wishes to see you tonight," he said, in an undertone. "Tell him I will come when I leave my dear grandmamma," she replied, feeling, with true delicacy, that the person to whom she could be of the most service just then was Madame de Saint-Méran. Valentine found her grandmother in bed. Silent caresses, heart-wrung sobs, broken sighs, burning tears, were all that passed in this sad interview, while Madame de Villefort, leaning on her husband's arm, maintained all outward forms of respect, at least towards the poor widow. She soon whispered to her husband, "I think it would be better for me to retire, with your permission, for the sight of me appears still to afflict your mother-in-law." Madame de Saint-Méran heard her. "Yes, yes," she said softly to Valentine, "let her leave, but do you stay." Madame de Villefort left, and Valentine remained alone beside the bed, for the procureur, overcome with astonishment at the unexpected death, had followed his wife. Meanwhile, Barrois had returned for the first time to old Noirtier, who, having heard the noise in the house, had, as we have said, sent his old servant to inquire the cause. On his return, his quick, intelligent eye interrogated the messenger. "Alas, sir," exclaimed Barrois, "a great misfortune has happened. Madame de Saint-Méran has arrived, and her husband is dead." Madame de Saint-Méran and Noirtier had never been on strict terms of friendship. Still, the death of one old man always considerably affects another. Noirtier let his head fall upon his chest, apparently overwhelmed and thoughtful. Then he closed one eye, in token of inquiry. "Mademoiselle Valentine?" Noirtier nodded his head. "She is at the ball, as you know, since she came to say good-bye to you in full dress." Noirtier again closed his left eye. "Do you wish to see her?" Noirtier again made an affirmative sign. "Well, they have gone to fetch her, no doubt, from Madame de Morcerf's. I will await her return, and beg her to come up here. Is that what you wish for?" "Yes," replied the invalid. Barrois, therefore, as we have seen, watched for Valentine, and informed her of her grandfather's wish. Consequently, Valentine came up to Noirtier, on leaving Madame de Saint-Méran, who, in the midst of her grief, had at last yielded to fatigue, and fallen into a feverish sleep. Within reach of her hand they placed a small table, upon which stood a bottle of orangeade, her usual beverage, and a glass. Then, as we have said, the young girl left the bedside to see Monsieur Noirtier. Valentine kissed the old man, who looked at her with such tenderness that her eyes again filled with tears, whose sources he thought must be exhausted. The old gentleman continued to dwell upon her with the same expression. "Yes, yes," said Valentine. "You mean that I have yet a kind grandfather left, do you not?" The old man intimated that such was his meaning. "Ah, yes, happily I have," replied Valentine. "Without that, what would become of me?" It was 1 o'clock in the morning. Barrois, who wished to go to bed himself, observed that after such sad events everyone stood in need of rest. Noirtier would not say that the only rest he needed was to see his child, but wished her good night, for grief and fatigue had made her appear quite ill. The next morning she found her grandmother in bed. The fever had not abated. On the contrary, her eyes glistened, and she appeared to be suffering from violent nervous irritability. "Oh, dear grandmother, are you worse?" exclaimed Valentine, perceiving all these signs of agitation. "No, my child, no," said Madame de Saint-Méran. "But I was impatiently waiting for your arrival, that I might send for your father." "My father?" inquired Valentine uneasily. "Yes, I wish to speak to him." Valentine durst not oppose her grandmother's wish, the cause of which she did not know, and an instant afterwards Villefort entered. "Sir," said Madame de Saint-Méran, without using any circumlocution, and as if fearing she had no time to lose, "you wrote to me concerning the marriage of this child." "Yes, madame," replied Villefort. "It is not only projected, but arranged." "Your intended son-in-law is named Monsieur Franz d'Épinay?" "Yes, madame." "Is he not the son of General d'Épinay, who was on our side, and who was assassinated some days before the usurper returned from the island of Elba?" "The same." "Does he not dislike the idea of marrying the granddaughter of a Jacobin?" "Our civil dissensions are now happily extinguished, mother," said Villefort. "Monsieur d'Épinay was quite a child when his father died. He knows very little of Monsieur Noirtier, and will meet him, if not with pleasure, at least with indifference." "Is it a suitable match?" "In every respect." "And the young man?" "Is regarded with universal esteem." "You approve of him?" "He is one of the most well-bred young men I know." During the whole of this conversation, Valentine had remained silent. "Well, sir," said Madame de Saint-Méran, after a few minutes' reflection, "I must hasten the marriage, for I have but a short time to live." "You, madame? You, dear mamma?" exclaimed Monsieur de Villefort and Valentine at the same time. "I know what I am saying," continued the Marchioness. "I must hurry you, so that, as she has no mother, she may at least have a grandmother to bless her marriage. I am all that is left to her belonging to my poor Renée, whom you have so soon forgotten, sir." "Ah, madame," said Villefort, "you forget that I was obliged to give a mother to my child." "A stepmother is never a mother, sir. But this is not to the purpose. Our business concerns Valentine. Let us leave the dead in peace." All this was said with such exceeding rapidity that there was something in the conversation that seemed like the beginning of delirium. "It shall be as you wish, madame," said Villefort, "more especially since your wishes coincide with mine, and as soon as Monsieur d'Épinay arrives in Paris—" "My dear grandmother," interrupted Valentine, "consider decorum, the recent death. You would not have me marry under such sad auspices." "My child," exclaimed the old lady sharply, let us hear none of the conventional objections that deter weak minds from preparing for the future. I also was married at the deathbed of my mother, and certainly I have not been less happy on that account. Still, that idea of death, madame, said Villefort. Still? Always. I tell you, I am going to die. Do you understand? Well, before dying, I wish to see my son-in-law. I wish to tell him to make my child happy. I wish to read in his eyes whether he intends to obey me. In fact, I will know him. I will, continued the old lady, with a fearful expression, that I may rise from the depths of my grave to find him, if he should not fulfil his duty. Madame, said Villefort, you must lay aside these exalted ideas, which almost assume the appearance of madness. The dead, once buried in their graves, rise no more. And I tell you, sir, that you are mistaken. This night I have had a fearful sleep. It seemed as though my soul were already hovering over my body. My eyes, which I tried to open, closed against my will, and what will appear impossible, above all to you, sir, I saw, with my eyes shut, in the spot where you are now standing, issuing from that corner where there is a door leading into Madame Villefort's dressing-room. I saw, I tell you, silently enter a white figure. Valentine screamed. It was the fever that disturbed you, madame, said Villefort. Doubt, if you please, but I am sure of what I say. I saw a white figure, and as if to prevent my discrediting the testimony of only one of my senses, I heard my glass removed, the same which is there now on the table. Oh, dear mother, it was a dream. So little was it a dream that I stretched my hand towards the bell, but when I did so, the shade disappeared. My maid then entered with a light. But she saw no one. Phantoms are visible to those only who ought to see them. It was the soul of my husband. Well, if my husband's soul can come to me, why should not my soul reappear to guard my granddaughter? The tie is even more direct, it seems to me. Oh, madame, said Villefort, deeply affected, in spite of himself, do not yield to those gloomy thoughts. You will long live with us, happy, loved, and honoured, and we will make you forget. Never, 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 said the Marchioness. When does Mr. Epinay return? We expect him every moment. It is well. As soon as he arrives, inform me. We must be expeditious, and then I also wish to see a notary, that I may be assured that all our property returns to Valentine. Ah, Grandma, murmured Valentine, pressing her lips on the burning brow, do you wish to kill me? Oh, how feverish you are! We must not send for a notary, but for a doctor. A doctor? Said she, shrugging her shoulders. I am not ill. I am thirsty, that is all. What are you drinking, dear Grandmamma? The same as usual, my dear. My glass is there on the table. Give it to me, Valentine. Valentine poured the orangeade into a glass and gave it to her grandmother with a certain degree of dread, for it was the same glass she fancied that had been touched by the spectre. The Marchioness drained the glass at a single draught, and then turned on her pillow, repeating, "The notary! The notary!" Monsieur de Villefort left the room, and Valentine seated herself at the bedside of her grandmother. The poor child appeared herself to require the doctor she had recommended to her aged relative. A bright spot burned in either cheek. Her respiration was short and difficult, and her pulse beat with feverish excitement. She was thinking of the despair of Maximilian, when he should be informed that Madame de Saint-Méran, instead of being an ally, was unconsciously acting as his enemy. More than once she thought of revealing all to her grandmother, and she would not have hesitated a moment if Maximilian Morel had been named Albert de Morcerf or Raoul de Château-Renaud. But Morel was of plebeian extraction, and Valentine knew how the haughty Marquis de Saint-Méran despised all who were not noble. Her secret had each time been repressed, when she was about to reveal it, by the sad conviction that it would be useless to do so, for, were it once discovered by her father and mother, all would be lost. 2 hours passed thus. Madame de Saint-Méran was in a feverish sleep, and the notary had arrived. Though his coming was announced in a very low tone, Madame de Saint-Méran arose from her pillow. "The notary!" she exclaimed. "Let him come in." The notary, who was at the door, immediately entered. "Go, Valentine," said Madame de Saint-Méran, "and leave me with this gentleman." "But, grandmamma—" "Leave me, go." The young girl kissed her grandmother, and left with her handkerchief to her eyes. At the door she found the valet de chambre, who told her that the doctor was waiting in the dining-room. Valentine instantly ran down. The doctor was a friend of the family, and at the same time one of the cleverest men of the day, and very fond of Valentine, whose birth he had witnessed. He had himself a daughter about her age, but whose life was one continued source of anxiety and fear to him, from her mother having been consumptive. "Oh," said Valentine, "we have been waiting for you with such impatience, dear Mr. Avrigny. But, first of all, how are Madeleine and Antoinette?" Madeleine was the daughter of Monsieur d'Avrigny, and Antoinette his niece. Monsieur d'Avrigny smiled sadly. "Antoinette is very well," he said, "and Madeleine tolerably so. But you sent for me, my dear child. It is not your father or Madame de Villefort who is ill. As for you, although we doctors cannot divest our patients of nerves, I fancy you have no further need of me than to recommend you not to allow your imagination to take too wide a field." Valentine coloured. Monsieur d'Avrigny carried the science of divination almost to a miraculous extent, for he was one of the physicians who always work upon the body through the mind. "No," she replied, "it is for my poor grandmother. You know the calamity that has happened to us, do you not?" "I know nothing," said Monsieur d'Avrigny. "Alas," said Valentine, restraining her tears, "my grandfather is dead." "Monsieur de Saint-Méran?" "Yes." "Suddenly?" "From an apoplectic stroke." "An apoplectic stroke?" repeated the doctor. "Yes, and my poor grandmother fancies that her husband, whom she never left, has called her, and that she must go and join him. Oh, Monsieur d'Avrigny, I beseech you, do something for her." "Where is she?" "In her room with the notary." "And Monsieur Noirtier?" "Just as he was, his mind perfectly clear, but the same incapability of moving or speaking." "And the same love for you, eh, my dear child?" "Yes," said Valentine, "he was very fond of me." "Who does not love you?" Valentine smiled sadly. "What are your grandmother's symptoms?" "An extreme nervous excitement and a strangely agitated sleep. She fancied this morning in her sleep that her soul was hovering above her body, which she at the same time watched. It must have been delirium. She fancies, too, that she saw a phantom enter her chamber, and even heard the noise it made on touching her glass." "It is singular," said the doctor. "I was not aware that Madame de Saint-Méran was subject to such hallucinations." "It is the first time I ever saw her in this condition," said Valentine, "and this morning she frightened me so that I thought her mad. And my father, who you know is a strong-minded man, himself appeared deeply impressed." "We will go and see," said the doctor. "What you tell me seems very strange." The notary here descended, and Valentine was informed that her grandmother was alone. "Go upstairs," she said to the doctor. "And you?" "Oh, I dare not. She forbade my sending for you, and, as you say, I am myself agitated, feverish, and out of sorts. I will go and take a turn in the garden to recover myself." The doctor pressed Valentine's hand, and while he visited her grandmother, she descended the steps. We need not say which portion of the garden was her favourite walk. After remaining for a short time in the parterre surrounding the house, and gathering a rose to place in her waist or hair, she turned into the dark avenue which led to the bench. Then, from the bench, she went to the gate. As usual, Valentine strolled for a short time among her flowers, but without gathering them. The mourning in her heart forbade her assuming the simple ornament, though she had not yet had time to put on the outward semblance of woe. She then turned towards the avenue. As she advanced, she fancied she heard a voice speaking her name. She stopped astonished. Then the voice reached her ear more distinctly, and she recognized it to be that of Maximilian. End of chapter 72.